The winter of 1824 in London was a season that draped itself in grey velvet and mist, where the gas lamps glimmered like timid stars against the darkened streets and horse-drawn carriages clattered over cobblestones slick with frost. Society's pulse beat in the glittering salons and drawing-rooms, where powdered wigs, silken dresses, and stiff manners concealed the currents of ambition, longing, and indiscretion beneath a veneer of propriety. Among the delicate figures navigating this world was Lady Eleanor Whitcomb, the third daughter of a family once admired for its modest elegance, now teetering at the precipice of social ruin. Eleanor, barely 19, had grown into her beauty with a kind of effortless grace that made whispered admiration unavoidable, yet the very charm that drew eyes also carried peril. In a society obsessed with appearances, a single misstep could shatter reputations and render a life of privilege unbearable. Eleanor had already learned this truth through the harsh tutelage of whispers, sideways glances, and the disapproving frown of her mother, a woman whose life had been spent navigating the treacherous labyrinth of London society with caution and careful diplomacy. The scandal began as all disasters in polite society often do, quietly, with a glance, a fleeting smile, a conversation that carried more weight than its participants intended. The Earl of Hawthorne, a man whose presence could command a room before a single word was uttered, had entered Eleanor's world like a storm disguised as sunlight. His charm was the sort that left women both thrilled and fearful, a delicate balance of danger and refinement that few could resist. Yet for Eleanor he was more than a temptation. He was a mirror, reflecting the boldness her upbringing sought to suppress. Their encounters, though carefully observed, escalated with a natural intensity that neither could, or perhaps would, restrain. It was a meeting in the dimmed corridors of a winter ball, a hand offered too long, a glance held too meaningfully, that sparked the rumor mill into a feverish state. And in a society where the smallest whisper could travel faster than a horse, whispers became proclamations. The elopement, as it came to be known, was almost a reality. Eleanor, fueled by the heady mixture of youthful desire and the intoxicating presence of the Earl, entertained the dangerous notion of abandoning propriety entirely. She imagined freedom, a life defined not by social expectation but by the flutter of her own heart. Yet, even as she packed her shawls and summoned the courage to meet him, Eleanor understood, with the clarity that comes only when one teeters on the edge, the weight of what such a choice would demand. Families destroyed, honor lost, doors closed forever in the glittering palaces of London society. The Earl, equally ensnared between duty and desire, hesitated. Pride, inherited expectation, and the invisible chains of aristocratic obligation bound him as tightly as any gilded cage. When their plan collapsed, whether by timely intervention or an unspoken, mutual recognition of consequence, the shock-wave rippled through both families and the wider ton with merciless precision. Eleanor's mother, Lady Whitcomb, embodied the sharp austerity of a woman whose life had been shaped by restraint and careful navigation of social mores. Her hands, always clasped over delicate gloves, trembled when she learned the extent of Eleanor's near transgression. Yet behind the sternness was a heart torn between relief and lingering fear, a fear that society would not forgive the indiscretion so easily. She spoke rarely, but when she did, her words struck with the precision of a well-tempered blade, reminding Eleanor that charm and beauty could not substitute for discretion. Eleanor listened, a mixture of guilt and determination knitting itself into the resolve that would come to define her. She would endure, she would restore what had been damaged, and she would emerge from this humiliation with a grace that no scandal could permanently tarnish. Meanwhile, the Earl of Hawthorne withdrew into the shadows of his own reputation, a man accustomed to admiration yet unprepared for the personal consequences of attachment. His titles, lands, and inherited duties demanded careful adherence to social expectation, and his own advisers whispered caution and judgment in equal measure. Yet private moments, brief flashes when society's scrutiny waned, were consumed with the memory of Eleanor, her laughter like wind through autumn leaves, her gaze that had pierced both vanity and pretense. He wrestled with pride, desire, and the bitter taste of humiliation, learning in the process that even men of rank were vulnerable to the same unpredictable currents of the heart that governed women's lives. His development was subtle, internal, but no less profound. The reckless charm that had defined him gave way, in private, to a quiet reflection of responsibility and longing. Winter deepened over London, and with it came the social rituals that dictated a family's recovery from scandal. Discreet acts of charity, carefully staged appearances, and the careful rebuilding of reputation through demonstration of virtue. Eleanor became known, in hushed but approving tones, for her work with the poor and her discreet support of orphanages, her elegance now matched by a deliberate grace and restraint. The whispers began to soften, admiration cautiously returning to those who had once whispered only in judgment. Yet even as society's memory of her impropriety dulled, Eleanor's own memory of that fateful winter remained vivid, a lesson etched into the core of her being, that love and desire were luxuries to be tempered with duty, that passion unchecked could imperil even the strongest of families. As the third winter approached, Eleanor, now a widow of quiet dignity, contemplated her return to the world from which she had once nearly fled. The decision was not born of vanity, but of courage. To face the Tun again, to walk through the same glittering halls that had witnessed her near downfall, and to reclaim a place that had once been hers without surrendering to the shadows of fear. Her preparations were meticulous, each gown, each delicate ornament chosen not merely for beauty but for the subtle message it conveyed, resilience, refinement, and the capacity to navigate the treacherous currents of society with intelligence and quiet strength. It was in this careful balance that Eleanor's true character had been forged, tempered by both scandal and survival, and ready to emerge like steel polished by fire. The winter air was sharp, scented with smoke from countless hearths, and the streets whispered with expectation. London's society, ever hungry for spectacle yet quick to forget, had yet to witness Eleanor's return, and the uncertainty of what lay ahead thrummed in every cautious step she took toward the grand houses of the Tun. Across town, the Earl of Hawthorne, equally aware of the season's approach, felt the pull of memory and unfinished business, the private ache of a heart that had not forgotten the woman who had almost unraveled his world. Pride, longing, and unspoken questions awaited him as surely as they did Eleanor, a testament to the power of love intertwined with consequence. And so, as candles were lit in drawing-rooms, frosts etched delicate patterns on windows, and London prepared once more to dance beneath glittering chandeliers, the stage was set for a confrontation not of swords or scandal, but of hearts still bound by what had been lost, and what might yet be reclaimed. Eleanor, tempered by 3 winters of reflection, and the Earl, hardened by pride yet softened by remembrance, were poised at the cusp of a world in which every glance and gesture could reopen old wounds or perhaps forge a new path toward redemption and love. The story of scandal, duty, and desire had paused, but its pulse lingered, promising that when their paths crossed again, the consequences of their past would collide with the fragile hopes of the present in a way that neither history nor the Tun could ignore. The winter ball arrived with a quiet pomp that transformed the Whitcomb residence into a glittering world of warmth and color, a stark contrast to the frost-laced streets of London. Gaslight flickered across polished floors, casting prismatic reflections from crystal chandeliers that seemed to float above the assembly of London's most discerning society. The air was heavy with the scent of beeswax, orange blossoms, and the faint musk of polished velvet, mingling with the delicate laughter and measured footsteps of those who moved with the practiced grace of generations accustomed to scrutiny. It was within this delicate lattice of etiquette and observation that Lady Eleanor Whitcomb stepped once more into a world that had nearly cast her aside. Her gown, of deep midnight velvet, hugged her form with understated elegance, while the necklace that rested at her throat glimmered like a fragment of moonlight. It was a relic of a past life, a connection to a mother she had mourned in private and a society she had once scandalized. The piece had belonged to the Earl's late mother, lost in rumor and misplacement, Yet here it rested against her chest, reclaiming history even as it drew the gaze of the man who had once threatened to unravel her very existence. The Earl of Hawthorne, standing in the shadowed corner of the ballroom, became aware of her presence before words could convey it. His eyes, accustomed to the delicate judgments of society, were drawn instantly to the flash of silver and pearl, recognizing the necklace with a sudden, piercing clarity. Memory and desire collided in the sharp intake of breath he barely concealed, and for a moment, the world of polished veneers and measured pleasantries dissolved into a tableau of past winters and whispered confidences. He watched her glide through clusters of ladies and gentlemen, her head held with quiet dignity, her expression calm yet imperceptibly guarded. The same Eleanor who had once been impulsive and vulnerable now moved with deliberate grace, each step a testament to the resilience she had cultivated through years of private reflection and public scrutiny. The contrast between the woman she had been and the woman she had become struck him profoundly. Admiration mingled with the ache of what had been lost, and pride wrestled with longing as he observed her from afar. Eleanor, aware of the inevitability of recognition, did not avert her gaze. She had rehearsed composure, yet the pulse of anticipation quickened in her chest, a reminder that the past, though tempered, was never entirely silent. Each detail of the room, the glint of a crystal chandelier, the rustle of a silk gown, the soft cadence of a waltz, served as both backdrop and provocation, sharpening her senses and reminding her of the delicate choreography required in a society that measured virtue in whispers. She moved with purpose, acknowledging acquaintances with gentle inclinations of the head, her eyes tracing the familiar curves of the hall, until her glance met his. In that instant, the murmured conversation of the room seemed to fade, replaced by the unspoken exchange between two souls acquainted with both passion and regret. The necklace, heavy with history and symbolism, rested like a sentinel over her heart, and the Earl understood, in that sharp, unsentimental clarity that only men of rank could achieve, that every detail, every gesture, every glance, was deliberate, charged with layers of meaning he had not yet deciphered. The dance of recognition was subtle yet profound. They approached one another with all the care society demanded, circling the edges of conversation and movement as though measured by some invisible choreography. Eleanor's smile, faint and controlled, suggested both acknowledgment and caution. The Earl's gaze, steady yet laden with emotion, conveyed his internal struggle between propriety and desire. Around them, the ton continued in oblivious procession, a parade of silks and tails, polite smiles and whispered speculation. But for these two, the room had become a stage where only memory, longing, and restraint performed. Every step toward one another was tempered by the weight of history, the near elopement, the whispered scandal, the private grief of separated hearts, and yet, the pull was undeniable, an undercurrent that neither could deny without betraying the very essence of their beings. As the evening unfolded, the Earl found himself drawn closer, compelled by the interplay of attraction and the need for control, yet always mindful of the eyes that roamed the room with judgmental curiosity. He observed Eleanor as she engaged in conversation with other members of society, each word measured, each gesture precise, and he understood that her reputation, carefully rebuilt through quiet charity and discretion, was a fragile artifact she guarded fiercely. The realization deepened his respect, mingled with frustration. The woman he had once sought with impetuous urgency had become a figure of self-possession and dignity, yet one whose presence stirred the same reckless impulses he had long struggled to restrain. The ballroom itself, resplendent with light and the hum of polite discourse, became a crucible in which the tension between desire and duty, past indiscretion and present propriety, was tested with every glance, every gesture, every breath. Eleanor, for her part, was acutely aware of the gravity of the encounter. The necklace, a relic of the Earl's family and a reminder of the interconnected fates of their histories, served as both shield and signal. It marked her as a woman who had endured, who had been shaped by scandal, and who now returned not as a figure of vulnerability but as one of quiet authority. She understood that the night's unfolding could either heal or reopen wounds, that every smile, every turn of phrase, every step taken across the polished floor was a declaration of intent or a test of resolve. Her internal landscape was rich with memory, the impulsive, impassioned girl she had once been, the pain of withdrawal from both love and society, the years of careful self-fashioning in the shadow of rumor. Each thought sharpened her awareness that the evening was no mere social display, but a delicate negotiation of hearts and reputations, of desire and propriety. The culmination of the first act of the evening arrived as a subtle confrontation, a moment suspended between propriety and intimacy. The Earl, summoned by both social expectation and personal compulsion, approached her with the formality required by custom yet could not hide the undercurrent of emotion in his stance. Eleanor's response was measured, a balance of courtesy and quiet challenge, acknowledging both their shared history and the delicate power she now wielded. Their dialogue, though sparse and measured, was laden with the weight of unspoken understanding. Glances that communicated memory and longing, gestures that bridged the divide of pride and past grievance. Around them, the room continued its perfunctory celebrations, unaware of the charged conversation that passed in subtle movements, in lingering eye contact, in the deliberate placement of a gloved hand upon a fan or a waltz invitation declined with grace. By the conclusion of the evening's opening movement, the foundations of renewed engagement were set, though unspoken. Eleanor, having navigated the initial confrontation with poise and purpose, understood that the path ahead would require both courage and strategy, for the world she inhabited demanded perfection even as it tested the heart. The Earl, equally aware of the perilous line between propriety and passion, recognized the depth of his own feelings, tempered now by reflection and an understanding of consequence. Their reunion, though restrained by the strictures of society, had reignited a connection that time had not extinguished, a spark that promised further confrontation, further negotiation, and, potentially, the delicate restoration of what had been nearly lost. As the final strains of music swelled across the ballroom, Eleanor moved with the elegance and purpose of one who has endured and learned, while the Earl lingered in the shadows of both admiration and restrained longing. The necklace at her throat glimmered with subtle defiance, a testament to memory, to endurance, and to the unspoken challenge that the coming nights would demand resolution. In that luminous hall, amid polished floors and glittering chandeliers, the past and present collided silently, setting the stage for a story of love and reconciliation that would unfold with both peril and beauty, demanding that hearts navigate the treacherous interplay of desire, duty, and societal expectation. The ballroom, now quieter as the evening waned, retained the faint glow of crystal chandeliers and the lingering echo of music, as if the very walls held their breath in anticipation. Eleanor Whitcomb moved with deliberate grace through the retreating clusters of guests, her dark velvet gown swaying with measured elegance, the silver and pearl necklace at her throat catching and reflecting the candlelight like fragments of a secret constellation. Each step she took was guided by years of discipline tempered by experience. The lessons of scandal, the careful cultivation of propriety, and the quiet fortitude that had carried her through winters of reflection and public scrutiny. Her heart, though guarded, pulsed with an anticipation she could not entirely quell, a mixture of apprehension and hope, for she knew that the man she had once nearly eloped with watched her with intent that neither time nor circumstance could diminish. The Earl of Hawthorne had lingered near the library doors, his hand brushing against the polished mahogany as though seeking anchor in a world of expectation, the weight of history pressing heavily upon him. The first words they exchanged were measured, as demanded by the vigilance of society, yet every syllable resonated with meaning beyond the polite cadence of conversation. Eleanor, with a quiet strength honed by years of reflection, spoke of her charitable endeavors, her voice calm, her tone imbued with both humility and pride. The Earl, attentive and restrained, responded with acknowledgment that hinted at both admiration and regret, each phrase carefully balanced to avoid the scandal that had once shadowed them. Yet in their eyes, the unspoken language of familiarity and longing was vivid, glances that lingered a heartbeat too long, subtle inclinations of the head, and the careful positioning of a hand upon a railing or fan, all gestures that communicated emotion restrained yet undeniable. In these private motions, the ballroom's polished veneer gave way to the raw, quiet force of two lives irrevocably intertwined, their past indiscretions now transformed into a complex tapestry of memory, desire, and tempered courage. Eleanor's thoughts drifted, as they inevitably did, to the winters spent in quiet contemplation, the evenings devoted to charity, the silent endurance of whispered speculation. Each act of discretion had strengthened her, molded her into a woman whose elegance was matched by intellect and judgment. She was no longer the impulsive young girl whose passions had nearly destroyed her. She had become a figure of quiet authority, capable of navigating both society's rigid codes and the tumultuous landscape of the heart. The necklace at her throat, borrowed yet emblematic of the Earl's family, symbolized this transformation, the convergence of memory, heritage, and survival, resting against her chest like a talisman against both judgment and the lingering ache of lost opportunity. The Earl, for his part, wrestled with his own evolution. Pride and duty had tempered the impulsive man who once considered elopement a thrill to be pursued without consequence. Experience had impressed upon him the fragile balance between desire and propriety, the heavy weight of legacy, and the intricate dance of reputation and honor. Yet despite the rigor imposed by rank and inheritance, his heart had never fully surrendered the claim of Eleanor's presence. In the quiet moments of observation, he noted the subtle refinements of her posture, the deliberate cadence of her speech, and the quiet authority that now commanded attention without demand. Each observation stirred both longing and admiration, an intricate tension of emotion sharpened by the knowledge of what had been nearly lost and what might yet be reclaimed. As the evening deepened, they found themselves drawn to a more private corner of the house, a library lined with leather-bound tomes and warmed by the gentle glow of a crackling fireplace. The world outside, with its polite gossip and measured scrutiny, fell away as they crossed the threshold, leaving only the intimacy of shared memory and the unspoken acknowledgement of enduring connection. Here, the conversation could unfold without the careful masks imposed by society, and both Eleanor and the Earl navigated this space with a mixture of caution and subtle courage. She spoke of her charity, the lives touched, the quiet triumphs of careful, deliberate action. He listened, absorbing both the narrative and the quiet strength it revealed, recognizing in her endurance a mirror to the resilience he had cultivated in his own solitary reflection. Their dialogue, though gentle, carried the weight of years of misunderstanding, regret, and yearning. Eleanor, with eyes that shone with quiet intensity, recounted her decisions with honesty, acknowledging both her impulsiveness and her measured redemption. The Earl, equally candid, revealed the private torment of longing restrained by duty, the ache of pride tempered by reflection, and the realization that his own character had been shaped as much by her absence as by societal expectation. In these exchanges, neither words nor silence were wasted. Each moment served to deepen understanding, to mend fractured trust, and to illuminate the enduring connection that had survived the trials of public scrutiny and private reflection alike. The necklace, a symbol of memory and reconciliation, became the focus of both admiration and acknowledgement. The Earl traced, with a subtle yet deliberate gesture, the pearls that had once belonged to his mother, now resting against the chest of the woman he had loved and misunderstood. Eleanor met his gaze steadily, recognizing the unspoken forgiveness, the acknowledgement of shared history, and the tentative promise of renewed trust. In that moment, both understood that the past, though unchangeable, could serve as a foundation for connection, that scandal need not forever shadow hearts willing to navigate the careful balance of desire and propriety. As night deepened, the intimacy of the library offered both reflection and tentative resolution. They spoke of future possibilities, the delicate navigation of society's expectations, and the cautious optimism of hearts long tested. The Earl, with measured reverence, acknowledged the courage Eleanor had displayed, the dignity with which she reclaimed her place in the ton, and the quiet strength that had transformed scandal into resilience. Eleanor, in turn, recognized his evolution, the tempered honor that now guided his actions, and the enduring affection that had survived both time and circumstance. In the gentle glow of candlelight, amidst the scent of aging paper and polished wood, they found a rhythm of understanding, a shared acknowledgement that hearts, when tempered by experience and patience, could endure even the harshest of winters. Finally, as the first hours of morning approached, they returned to the ballroom for a final glance at the glittering assembly. The guests, now weary yet still bound by the ritual of politeness, were unaware of the subtle resolutions that had taken place in the quiet corners of the house. Eleanor moved with calm assurance, the necklace catching the final glimmers of candlelight, while the Earl, observing from a respectful distance, understood that the bond between them had shifted irrevocably. It was no longer defined by impulsive desire or societal expectation alone, but by an awareness of consequence, a respect for endurance, and a recognition of enduring affection. The night's events had transformed both, leaving them poised on the precipice of renewed connection and carefully guarded hope. In the final moments of the evening, Eleanor and the Earl shared a brief, deliberate acknowledgement, a nod, a glance, a subtle inclination, that conveyed the unspoken resolution of the night. Scandal had been tempered by endurance, desire by propriety, and hearts, long tested by circumstance, had found a tentative reconciliation. The necklace, resting like a sentinel over Eleanor's heart, glimmered as a silent witness to their renewed understanding, a symbol of memory, resilience, and the delicate negotiation between past and present. As the candles burned low and the last strains of music faded, both recognized that their story was far from concluded. It had merely entered a new chapter, one defined by tempered passion, shared reflection, and the quiet but unwavering promise of love reclaimed. The winter air outside awaited, crisp and unyielding, but within the walls of the Whitcomb residence, Two hearts had navigated the treacherous currents of desire and duty with patience, intelligence, and courage. The ballroom, once a stage for scandal and whispered judgment, had become a testament to endurance, redemption, and the enduring power of connection. As the first light of dawn touched the frosted streets of London, Eleanor Whitcomb and the Earl of Hawthorne stood, not as figures defined by past missteps, but as architects of their own fates, prepared to navigate the delicate balance between society, honor, and the quiet reclamation of hearts long tested but never broken.